Days passed quietly at the music academy, but there was a new rhythm to life there. Students moved with a subtle respect, teachers observed with a quiet smile, and the cleaner continued his nightly routine as he always had, sweeping floors, dusting benches, emptying bins, and polishing the grand piano until it gleamed. Yet beneath this routine, something profound was unfolding. His presence had shifted the energy of the place, not with words, but with music, humility, and quiet strength. He no longer feared attention, not because he sought it, but because he had learned that sharing his music wasn't about praise, it was about connection. When the piano sang beneath his fingers, he was speaking a language everyone understood, even if they didn't know how to put it into words. The academy had begun to feel alive in a different way. Students lingered to listen. They didn't try to compete or judge anymore. They simply felt. One evening, the academy announced an informal showcase for students to perform. It was a small gathering, meant to give the students confidence in front of an audience of peers and teachers. Yet this time, there was a sense of anticipation in the air, not just for the students, but for the man who had quietly become the heart of the academy. Everyone wondered if he would play. Many silently hoped he would. The cleaner arrived, mop in hand, bucket trailing behind him as he always did. He moved silently through the hallways, sweeping and tidying. But when he approached the practice hall, he noticed the room had been arranged differently. Chairs were placed neatly for an audience. A few students had volunteered to stay and watch, though they didn't know how to ask him to play. The anticipation was tangible. He paused for a moment, considering. He hadn't planned to perform. But then he felt the quiet pulse of music in his chest, reminding him that this was more than practice or duty. Music had returned to his life not to be hidden, but to be shared. And perhaps tonight the right moment had come. As he approached the piano, some students cleared the space and whispered encouragement. One finally spoke, voice gentle. "Please, play for us. Just a little. We'd like to hear you." The cleaner nodded slowly. He sat at the piano, brushing his hands lightly over the keys. A hush fell over the room. The first note sounded soft, almost tentative, but then another followed and another. The music grew steadily, filling the hall, carrying with it not just melody, but the weight of years, the depth of life, and the quiet triumph of a man who had never stopped loving what he did. The students sat silently, absorbed. They had seen him play before, but tonight was different. There was an intensity, a depth, a story unfolding with every note. This wasn't performance. This was revelation. Every chord carried experience, hardships endured, moments of loss, nights spent dreaming in silence, and the enduring power of hope. Some of the students leaned closer, their eyes wide, absorbing the emotion. One whispered, "I've never felt anything like this. It's like he's speaking directly to us without words." The cleaner continued, unaware of the whispers. His fingers moved gracefully across the keys, telling stories that couldn't be written, conveying emotions that couldn't be spoken. The room seemed to hold its breath, letting the music resonate, allowing every note to sink deep into the hearts of those listening. Then, one of the students, the same one who had once mocked him, swallowed nervously. I don't know how he does it. It's not just talent. It's life itself." The cleaner didn't stop. He let the music carry him forward, pouring everything he had into the melody. This was more than a performance. It was a gift, a bridge between his world and theirs, a demonstration of what it meant to persevere, to feel deeply, and to remain humble in the face of life's challenges. By the middle of the piece, a few students had tears in their eyes. Some quietly wiped them away, not wanting to break the spell. They realized that the man before them had endured a life of quiet struggle, and yet through it all, he had held on to beauty, hope, and music. Each note was a testament to his resilience, each chord a statement of his humanity. The cleaner finished the piece with a gentle flourish, letting the final note linger in the air like a whisper. The room remained silent, not out of discomfort, but in reverence. No one wanted to disturb the moment. Slowly, a student cleared his throat, then another, and eventually the entire room erupted in quiet applause. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was sincere, heartfelt, and full of admiration. The cleaner looked up at them, eyes calm, yet warm. "Music isn't about showing off," he said softly. "It's about connection, about sharing something that comes from the heart. It's not applause I seek, it's understanding." A student stepped forward, voice trembling with emotion. You've given us more than music. You've shown us humility, courage, and the importance of never giving up. We can't thank you enough." The cleaner smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You don't need to thank me. Music is its own reward. The fact that it touches you, that you feel it, that is enough." From that evening onward, the academy felt transformed. Students who had once been competitive or judgmental now listened more carefully, appreciated effort over skill alone, and looked for the hidden potential in others. Teachers noticed a change too, realizing that respect and empathy had grown alongside technical knowledge. The cleaner's influence had quietly reshaped the environment, not through words or authority, but through example, music, and the grace of his presence. One day, a young student approached him after practice, holding a notebook of music. Could you help me?" the student asked. "I want to play like you, not just the notes, but the feeling. I want people to feel it like you make us feel." The cleaner nodded slowly. "I can show you," he said softly. "But you must listen first. Listen with your heart. Feel what the music wants to say, not just what the page tells you. That is where true music lives." The student smiled, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Together they sat at the piano, fingers touching keys lightly, hearts open, and the notes began to flow. And in that moment, the cleaner realized that music had returned fully to his life, not as a solitary passion, but as a shared gift, a bridge between souls, a way to shape the world quietly but profoundly. Weeks later, the academy organized a small showcase, this time with the cleaner's full participation. Teachers and students watched in awe as he played a piece that carried not just skill, but the story of his life. People were moved to tears not just by the notes, but by the emotion, the honesty, and the depth of experience behind them. At the end of the evening, a student whispered to another, "He didn't just play the piano, he played life itself." The cleaner, as always, returned to his routine afterward, sweeping floors, polishing benches, emptying bins, carrying music and stories in his heart. He had changed the academy, not with authority or fame, but with the quiet, undeniable power of being true to himself and sharing what he loved. His story spread slowly, from student to student, teacher to teacher. It wasn't a story of fame or recognition, but of resilience, humility, and the enduring power of music to reach hearts. Students learned that greatness can hide in unexpected places, and that kindness, patience, and dedication often leave deeper impressions than skill alone. And in the quiet of the night, when the academy was empty and the lights dimmed, the cleaner sat at the piano alone, playing softly. The notes echoed through the hallways, carrying with them the weight of a life lived fully yet quietly, of struggles overcome, and of the beauty found in persistence and hope. He thought of the students who had watched him, the lives he had touched, and the lessons shared without words. He felt peace, knowing that music had returned to him not as a performance but as connection, understanding, and love expressed in its purest form. The academy was never the same again. Students no longer mocked or overlooked the quiet, ordinary people around them. They listened, they observed, they felt, and they remembered that even someone who seems invisible can change the world, one note at a time, simply by being true to themselves. And so, the cleaner continued quietly, faithfully, and humbly, letting the music speak for him, knowing that in every note, he carried not just sound but heart, soul, and the power to touch the lives of everyone who would stop, listen, and feel. In the end, it wasn't the applause, the attention, or the recognition that mattered. It was the understanding, the connection, and the quiet transformation he had inspired in others. And that was more than enough. The morning after the recital, the music academy felt different. Students moved quietly through the halls, whispering in low tones, their eyes occasionally following the cleaner as he worked. He moved from room to room, sweeping, dusting, and polishing as he always had. But there was a new weight to his presence. It wasn't arrogance or pride. It was the quiet gravity of someone who had shared a part of themselves so fully that the world could not ignore it. For weeks, the students had begun to see him differently. They had watched him play, listened to the emotion in his music, and slowly, the teasing and laughter that had once followed him were replaced by curiosity, respect, and sometimes awe. But they didn't yet know the full story behind the music. They had seen the skill, felt the emotion, but the reason why he had lived quietly for so many years remained a mystery. That morning, a group of students gathered in the practice hall, whispering among themselves. "He plays like no one else," one said. "But why doesn't he want to perform for anyone? Why does he hide like this?" Another added, "It's more than that. I think there's something in his past. Something that made him stop playing in public." The bolder students decided they needed to know. They wanted to understand not just the music, but the man who had moved them so deeply. So after the hall emptied, they approached him carefully, speaking softly. "Excuse us," one said, hesitating. We were wondering, could you tell us your story?" The cleaner looked up from the mop he was holding, eyes calm but cautious. "My story?" he asked softly. "Yes," another student said. "We've heard you play. We've seen how the piano comes alive in your hands. We want to know why you stopped, why you hide, why your music is so powerful." The cleaner paused. He had always kept this part of his life private. Few people had ever asked, and even fewer had cared enough to listen. He glanced around the empty hall, then slowly sat at the piano. His fingers rested lightly on the keys, not to play, but as if seeking courage. "It's a long story," he began, voice low and measured. "I started playing when I was very young. My parents couldn't afford much, but they noticed I had a gift. They encouraged me as best they could. Music became my world. Every note was a friend. Every melody, a place where I could escape from the troubles around me." The students listened, in silence, leaning in slightly, drawn by the weight in his voice. "I was talented," they said. "Maybe too talented for someone in my situation. I dreamed of playing in big halls, performing for people who would understand the music. I imagined applause, recognition, a life built around something I loved." He paused, a faint shadow crossing his face. "But life has a way of changing your path. My father became ill when I was still young. There were bills, responsibilities, things I couldn't ignore. I had to stop dreaming about stages and audiences. I had to focus on keeping my family together. The piano became silent. I didn't play in public. I didn't compete. I kept it inside where it belonged to me alone." The students were quiet, absorbing his words. They had known the music was powerful, but now they understood why it carried so much emotion, why it felt like the weight of a life lived fully yet quietly. "I took jobs, worked long hours, did what I had to do to survive," he continued. "Music wasn't gone. It was always there in my heart, in my hands when no one was watching. But I thought, who would care? Who would want to hear music from a man like me? So I stayed invisible. I cleaned floors, swept halls, and watched the world of music move on without me." One of the students, a girl who had always been quiet, whispered, "But you never stopped feeling it. You never stopped playing in your heart." He nodded slowly. "Yes, and that's the thing about music. It doesn't care about circumstances. It doesn't ask for applause or recognition. It simply exists. And sometimes life gives you a chance to share it again, even when you least expect it." The students sat in stunned silence, realizing that the music they had admired was not just talent, it was survival, sacrifice, love, and resilience. Every note the cleaner had played carried decades of experience, moments of loss, and quiet victories. "I didn't play for anyone because I didn't want to be judged or laughed at, or seen as just someone trying to reach for a dream I couldn't have," he said softly. "But then, the other day, someone asked me to play. I wasn't sure I should. I feared it might all come crashing down, but once I touched the keys, I realized music is bigger than fear. It is bigger than shame. It is bigger than silence." Another student spoke, voice trembling slightly. We mocked you at first. We didn't understand, but when you played, it was like everything stopped. We saw something real, something human." The cleaner smiled faintly, a soft expression of understanding and kindness. "That is all I ever wanted. For someone to listen, not to praise, not to judge, but to really listen. Music is more than notes, it's life itself in a language everyone can understand, even if they can't put it into words." The students nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes. They realized that the man they had once dismissed was now teaching them something far beyond music. He was teaching them empathy, respect, and the value of seeing people for who they truly are, not for the role they play in society. "I don't seek recognition," he said, standing and picking up his mop. "I work here quietly, because life has a way of giving and taking. But music will always be there, and sometimes it reaches people in ways we never imagine." One student stepped forward, hesitant. Could we learn from you? Could you show us how to feel music, not just play it?" The cleaner looked at them carefully. He saw sincerity, curiosity, and respect in their eyes. "Yes," he said, "I will show you. But you must understand, music is not just fingers on keys. It's heart, it's life, it's emotion. If you don't put yourself into it, it will never truly matter." From that day, the students began to approach him differently. They weren't just there to practice their scales or learn songs. They came to listen, to feel, and to understand. The cleaner shared small lessons, guiding them not just in technique, but in connecting with music in a deeper human way. He told them stories of the past, of hardship, of dreams deferred, and of hope quietly held. Each story carried a lesson, and each note he played echoed the emotions behind it. The students began to see music not as competition, but as expression. They began to understand that skill alone was empty without feeling, that beauty came not from perfection, but from sincerity. The academy itself seemed to change. Teachers noticed a shift in attitude. Students treated each other with more respect and patience. They listened, really listened, and valued the unseen efforts of others. The cleaner remained humble, quiet, and diligent, but his presence had transformed the environment. The power of his music and his story had touched hearts in ways no one had expected. One evening, after the students had left, he sat alone at the piano, playing softly for himself. The notes flowed like a river, carrying memories of the past, the present, and the hope of the future. He remembered the moments he had sacrificed, the times he had doubted himself, and the nights he had been silent while life went on around him. And yet, here he was, sharing the deepest parts of himself, even quietly, and finding connection in ways that mattered more than recognition. For the students, the cleaner's story became a lesson they would carry for a lifetime. They understood that people were more than they seemed. They realized that talent could be hidden behind ordinary appearances, and that a life lived fully, with humility, resilience, and quiet courage, could teach more than any classroom or performance ever could. And for the cleaner, there was peace. He had shared a part of himself that had been silent for years, and in doing so he had touched hearts, inspired curiosity, and reminded the world of the power of music, humility, and human connection. The academy was no longer just a place of practice and performance. It had become a space where respect, empathy, and understanding flourished. And in the center of it all, the cleaner moved quietly, carrying his music and his story, showing everyone, without words, that even the most unseen person can create the most unforgettable impact. The following week brought a sense of tension that the academy had never seen before. The students were preparing for an informal recital in the main hall, a night where a few would showcase their skills to classmates and teachers. It was meant to be casual, but the air buzzed with excitement and nervousness. Everyone wanted to impress. Everyone wanted to be noticed. The cleaner moved through the hallways as he always did, bucket in hand, mop trailing behind him. He tried to remain invisible, focusing on his usual tasks, sweeping, dusting, and tidying. But this time he felt it differently. The glances he received were sharper, more calculating. He sensed that some of the students were talking about him in whispers. Curiosity, doubt, admiration, and perhaps even a hint of challenge filled the room he passed. He reached the main hall and began to clean around the benches. The large piano sat in the center, gleaming under the soft lights. He paused for a moment, his hands on the mop, eyes resting on the familiar keys. Memories of performing came rushing back, both the joy and the pain, the triumphs and the disappointments. His heart beat faster than usual, not from fear but from anticipation. Music was returning to him more alive than before, and tonight he felt it might ask more from him than he had ever expected. In the corner, a group of students whispered. One of them leaned toward another and said, "Do you think he'll play tonight if we ask him?" Another shrugged. "I don't know. He hasn't said much, but after yesterday I wouldn't be surprised. He's something else entirely. I just hope he doesn't get angry at us for asking." One of the bolder students, the same boy who had mocked him before, smirked. "Let's see how he handles a real audience. A little teasing never hurt anyone, or did it?" He laughed, but it was slightly nervous. The cleaner had finished his routine around the benches and was about to start sweeping the far side of the hall when the student approached. "Excuse me," he said. "Could you maybe play for us? Just a short piece? We would really like to hear you." The cleaner's hands tightened on the mop. He hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. He didn't crave attention, but he also couldn't ignore the longing in the student's eyes. Music had always been more than performance. It was connection, understanding, emotion, and now he sensed that something deeper was being asked of him. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "Just for a little while." The students moved aside, forming a loose semicircle around the piano. Some leaned against walls, others perched on benches, curiosity and anticipation shining in their eyes. They were silent now, unsure what to expect. Would the man they had begun to respect falter? Would he rise again, showing the magic that had captivated them days ago? The cleaner walked to the piano and sat down. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, not from fear but from memory. This was no ordinary performance. This was him, fully present, letting the music speak without restraint. He pressed the first key softly. It sounded hesitant at first, as if he were testing whether his hands still remembered the language of the piano. Then another key and another. The melody began to form, gentle and delicate, floating through the hall. The students leaned closer. Even the boldest skeptics were silent, unable to look away. The cleaner closed his eyes, letting the notes flow naturally. His fingers moved with confidence now, striking chords that were rich, deep, and full of life. The music was no longer just a song. It was a story, his story told without words. Each note carried memory. The joy of moments once lived, the pain of loss, the strength of endurance, and the quiet beauty of perseverance. Some students gasped quietly. One whispered, "It's like he's speaking without speaking." Another added, "I never knew music could feel like this. It's alive. It's real." The cleaner was lost in the melody. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and his face showed emotion. Every expression a reflection of the song's depth. This was more than practice or performance. It was release, revelation, and connection all at once. Then one of the students, trying to provoke a reaction, leaned forward. "What happens if you make a mistake?" he said, smirking slightly. "Do you think you'll mess up under all these eyes?" The cleaner didn't falter. He continued playing, faster now, the music swelling, filling every corner of the hall. The notes flowed like a river, unstoppable, precise, yet full of feeling. The students' smirks vanished, replaced by awe. They could feel the energy of his life poured into every key, the experience of decades expressed in moments of pure music. By the time he reached the climax of the piece, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The cleaner's fingers moved with speed and grace, each note landing with perfect clarity, yet carrying weight far beyond its sound. The students were mesmerized. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply stood frozen, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they were witnessing. The final note lingered in the air, a soft, fading echo. The hall remained silent, not because of awkwardness, but because no one wanted to disturb the moment. The cleaner's hands rested lightly on the keys. His chest rose and fell slowly as he opened his eyes, looking at the students. For a long moment, no one spoke. The magnitude of what they had just heard was too much for words. Then one student, his voice trembling, said, I didn't know. I didn't know someone could play like that." Another added softly, It's like the piano was made for him, not the other way around." The cleaner smiled faintly. "Music is not about skill or recognition," he said quietly. "It's about what you feel and what you give to others without expecting anything back." A student stepped forward, eyes shining. We didn't believe it at first. We thought it was just a joke, but you're amazing. You've shown us something more than music. You've shown us life." The cleaner nodded. "I have spent years playing quietly, thinking no one would care. But the music always mattered, even if only to me. Now, I see that it can matter to others too. The students were silent again, absorbing his words. They realized that this man, who they had once ignored and mocked, carried a depth they could scarcely understand. He had faced life, endured hardships, and still found beauty to share. His music wasn't just notes on a page, it was emotion, history, struggle, and hope all at once. One of the students, a young girl who had been skeptical, stepped closer. Could you teach us? Not just the notes, but the feeling? She asked softly. The cleaner looked at her, seeing honesty and curiosity. I can show you, he said. But music isn't learned from books or lessons alone. You must feel it. Every note must come from your heart. If you do that, then you can share it too. The girl nodded eagerly. Others joined, and slowly a small, quiet group formed around him. He began guiding them, not as a teacher in the formal sense, but as someone sharing what life had taught him through music. He showed them how to listen, how to let the melody flow naturally, and how to pour emotion into every sound. As the evening went on, the students learned more than they had from any lesson or lecture. They learned humility, respect, patience, and the quiet power of hidden talent. They realized that greatness was often invisible, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And for the cleaner, the joy of sharing what he loved returned in a way he hadn't felt in years. When the hall emptied at last, the cleaner sat alone at the piano, fingers brushing the keys softly, playing a melody just for himself. He remembered the path that had brought him here, the years of sacrifice, the moments of doubt, and the quiet nights when music had been his only companion. He felt peace, knowing that the music could still touch hearts and that his presence mattered more than he had thought. The academy, too, had changed. Students walked its halls with a new understanding. They looked beyond appearances and listened more closely. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A man who had been invisible, yet whose music carried more depth and beauty than any performance they had ever seen. The cleaner returned to his routine, mopping floors and emptying bins, his presence quiet but powerful. The memory of the performance lingered, not as a display of skill, but as a reminder of the impact one person could have by being true to themselves and sharing their gift, even quietly, with the world. And as he walked home under the city lights that night, the sound of the piano still echoing in his mind, he smiled softly. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not for his job, not for his role, but for the depth of his soul expressed through music. And that The next week at the Music Academy felt different. The cleaner moved through the halls as he always did, mop in hand, bucket trailing behind him, but the air around him seemed heavier. Students stared when he passed, some whispering quietly, others glancing at him as if they were remembering the notes he had played days ago. He tried not to notice, focusing instead on his work, but it was impossible to ignore the way eyes followed him, curious, respectful, sometimes skeptical. That evening, a small group of students gathered in the main practice room, chatting excitedly. They were preparing for a friendly recital, something informal, but they wanted to practice in front of each other. As they argued about who would play first, one of them leaned back in a chair and smirked. You know, we've heard him play before. The cleaner. Don't say that like he's ordinary, another said. He's different. He plays like he's lived 100 lifetimes. The first student laughed nervously. Yeah, well, I still don't believe it. I mean, yesterday was one thing, but I want to see if he can really do it again. Let's ask him. They exchanged mischievous glances, unsure if it was a joke or a challenge. It was as if they wanted to see if the man they had started to respect could handle pressure, if he would crumble or rise to the occasion. Meanwhile, the cleaner was finishing his usual rounds. He moved from the practice rooms to the hallways, quietly sweeping up dust and wiping down benches. He had noticed the students watching him, but he tried to ignore them. Music had been a part of him for so long that he didn't need an audience to feel its power. It was private, personal, something that belonged to him alone when the world wasn't listening. Then came the knock on the door. He turned slowly. One of the students peeked in, smiling nervously. We were wondering, could you play for us again? Just for a bit. The cleaner felt the familiar tug of hesitation. He didn't want to be in the spotlight, even for a friendly performance. Performing once had already stirred emotions he wasn't used to sharing. But the student's eyes were honest. They weren't mocking him. They were asking sincerely. He took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "Just a little." The students watched in silence as he walked to the piano. His hands brushed the keys softly at first, almost testing the water. The first notes were gentle, delicate, like a whisper. They floated through the room, carrying more than just sound. They carried feeling, memory, life itself. The students were silent, watching intently. This time, however, there was a challenge in their eyes. Some of them had expected yesterday's music to be a fluke, a lucky touch of emotion. They wanted proof that he could perform again, that the music wasn't a one-time gift. The cleaner, however, was unaware of their thoughts. He closed his eyes and let the music guide him. His fingers moved over the keys with ease, confidence, and precision. The melody grew, rich and flowing, each note speaking of the years he had lived, the struggles he had faced, and the dreams he had quietly carried with him. The students could feel the emotion in the room. They leaned closer to the piano, mesmerized. They whispered to each other, trying not to disturb him. "It's like he's telling a story. Every note," one said softly. Another whispered, "I never thought music could feel like this. It's alive." The cleaner continued to play, unaware of the words, the whispers, or the glances. He was lost in the music in the way it had always spoken for him. The piano was no longer an instrument or a piece of wood and metal. It was an extension of himself, an expression of everything he had held inside for so long. Then, halfway through the piece, one of the students dared to tease again. "What happens if he makes a mistake?" the boy said, smirking. "Do you think he'll fall apart like the rest of us?" The cleaner didn't stop. His hands moved faster, more confidently, filling the room with a cascade of sound. The notes were precise but alive, carrying his history, his experiences, his joys, and his losses. The students were stunned into silence. Not one of them dared to laugh or make another comment. They realized something important. This was not just skill. This was life translated into music. The cleaner's fingers were telling a story that words could never express. Every key he touched carried the weight of years, the resilience of someone who had faced hardship and kept moving forward. When he finally paused, the room was quiet. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of awe. The students were frozen, unable to speak. They had never seen anything like it. Some of them blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Others just stared, mouths slightly open, still processing the depth of what they had witnessed. Finally, one of the students spoke, voice shaking. That was incredible. I don't know what to say." The cleaner smiled faintly, his eyes still on the keys. "Music isn't about saying things," he said softly. "It's about feeling them." Another student, the one who had teased him the most, swallowed hard. I was wrong to make fun of you. I didn't understand." The cleaner nodded. "People often judge by what they see, not what they feel. It's natural." There was a pause. The students glanced at each other, silently agreeing that the man before them was unlike anyone they had ever known. His humility, his skill, and the emotion he carried were not things that could be learned in a classroom or earned through practice alone. They were the product of a life lived fully, with struggle, sacrifice, and quiet determination. One of the students stepped forward. Could you teach me?" he asked hesitantly. "I mean, not just the notes. I want to learn how to feel the music like you do." The cleaner's hands rested on the keys. He looked at the student carefully, seeing sincerity in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "I can teach you," he said. "But you must understand that music is more than just what you play. It is what you feel. It comes from here." He tapped his chest softly. "If you don't feel it, no one else will." The student nodded eagerly, and for the first time, the cleaner felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. The joy of sharing, of connecting through music. He realized that his talent, once hidden and forgotten, could now touch others in a way he had never imagined. That evening, after the students left, the cleaner sat alone at the piano. The melody lingered in the air as he played softly for himself, remembering all the years he had been silent. He thought of the students, of their surprise and awe, and a quiet smile spread across his face. Music was back in his life, not as a performance for recognition, but as a bridge between hearts. The academy was changing too. Students began to notice more than just their own skills. They started paying attention to others, listening carefully, respecting hidden talent, and learning humility. They realized that greatness wasn't always obvious and that the world often overlooked the most extraordinary people. The cleaner continued his work night after night, sweeping floors, polishing benches, emptying trash bins, and carrying music in his heart. He played occasionally softly for himself or for the rare student who asked sincerely. He never sought attention or praise, but he had discovered something more important than recognition: the quiet power of connecting with others through the beauty he carried inside. Sometimes, when the hallways were empty and the lights dim, the sound of his piano playing drifted through the academy. Students who had once mocked or ignored him paused, listening quietly, feeling the emotion and depth in every note. They had learned an important lesson: that talent and greatness are often hidden, waiting for a moment to be discovered, and that a person's worth can never be measured by appearances alone. And so, the cleaner's life went on night after night. He moved through the academy quietly, carrying the weight of his past, the beauty of his music, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, in his own way, he was teaching more than just notes. He was teaching respect, humility, and the power of seeing beyond what is obvious. By the end of that week, the students no longer whispered about him with doubt or mockery. Instead, their conversations were filled with curiosity, admiration, and a desire to understand. They had seen something rare, something real, something that could not be taught in a classroom, and the cleaner, as always, remained humble, carrying music in his heart, quietly changing the world one note at a time. The next day, the cleaner returned to the academy as usual. He moved quietly through the hallways, carrying his mop and bucket, careful not to disturb anyone. He had no intention of drawing attention to himself. Yet as he worked, he noticed subtle changes. Students whispered when they saw him, glancing at him with a new kind of curiosity rather than indifference. Some paused in the hallway, eyes wide, as if they were remembering something they hadn't expected to see. It made him uncomfortable. He had never wanted recognition. Music had once been his world, but he had learned to keep it hidden after years of sacrifices and struggles. Fame, applause, or attention had never been his goal. He just loved to play. That was enough. Despite his unease, he tried to ignore the glances and returned to his work, sweeping along the corridors, wiping down benches, and emptying bins. The normal rhythm of cleaning helped him think. He reminded himself that life was about small, quiet moments, not the applause of others. Still, the memory of yesterday's small audience lingered in his mind, and he couldn't help but smile at the thought of the notes that had once felt like his entire world flowing again beneath his fingers. Later in the afternoon, the same group of students gathered again near the piano room. They were laughing and comparing performances, as they often did. But this time, the conversation was different. "You hear him yesterday?" one of them asked. "The cleaner?" "Yeah," another said. "I can't believe it. Who would have thought he could play like that?" They were mocking him, remember? And then I don't even know how to describe it. It was like the piano belonged to him, not the room, not us, him. The conversation continued, a mixture of awe and disbelief. They couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It wasn't just skill. It was something more. There was emotion in every note, a story behind each chord. Inside, the cleaner went about his work, sweeping the practice room as he always did. He didn't know the students were talking about him again. He kept his head down, focusing on the mop, feeling a quiet satisfaction at the order he left behind. But there was a small part of him that wondered if he had made a mistake by playing. Then, one of the students knocked on the door. The cleaner looked up, startled. I didn't expect anyone," he said softly. The student hesitated. Sorry, we just wanted to ask, could you maybe play again? Just a little? I mean, we didn't mean to make fun of you. We were curious. Please." The cleaner paused, considering. His hands gripped the mop tightly. He wanted to say no. He wanted to continue being invisible, to avoid attention. But something in the student's tone was sincere. They weren't mocking this time. They genuinely wanted to hear music, not just to laugh. He nodded slowly. "Just for a moment," he said, his voice quiet, almost shy. The students watched in silence as he walked to the piano. He brushed a finger across the keys, feeling the cool smoothness beneath his hand. His memory stirred, and he remembered how it felt to lose himself in music. Every emotion he had ever felt could live in a song, if he allowed it. He began softly, a gentle melody that grew slowly into a richer sound. The students were quiet, holding their breath. Some leaned against the wall, eyes wide, as the cleaner's hands danced across the keys with precision, grace, and feeling. It wasn't fast or flashy. It wasn't about showing off. It was about speaking without words, telling a story that went deeper than the surface. Every note carried experience, the happiness of small joys, the sadness of loss, the determination of someone who had never given up despite hardships. The cleaner closed his eyes as he played, letting the music carry him. The students watched, mesmerized. One of them whispered to another, "It's like he's telling us his life story through the piano." As the song ended, the cleaner opened his eyes. He looked at the students and saw tears glistening in one of their eyes. He felt a warmth in his chest, but also a pang of sadness. Music was meant to be shared, but he had rarely let anyone see his heart before. One student finally spoke, voice shaking slightly. I didn't know someone could play like that. I mean, I thought you were just a cleaner." The cleaner smiled faintly. "Everyone has something inside them," he said. "Sometimes people don't see it until you give them a reason to look." The students were silent, absorbing his words. The laughter, teasing, and arrogance of yesterday had vanished. In its place was respect, admiration, and a little bit of wonder. They realized that talent and strength could be hidden behind the most ordinary faces, in the quietest people. For the cleaner, the moment was strange. He wasn't used to attention, to people looking at him with respect instead of indifference. But he understood something important that night. The way music connected him to others was more powerful than he had remembered. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about touching hearts, even briefly, and reminding people of beauty in unexpected places. Days passed, and the cleaner continued his nightly routines. Yet the atmosphere in the academy began to shift. Students greeted him differently now. Some paused to say hello. Others watched him play quietly when he had a chance. He still remained humble, never asking for attention, never performing for anyone's approval. But the music had returned to his life in a subtle way, a reminder that the past could live in the present, even if only for a moment. One evening, as he polished the floor near the grand piano, a student approached him hesitantly. I wanted to ask something," the student said, nervously shifting from one foot to the other. "Would you maybe teach me a little? I mean, just show me how to feel the music like you do." The cleaner looked at the student and felt a mixture of surprise and warmth. For so long he had kept music inside, thinking it belonged to the past, to someone else. But now here was someone asking to learn, not just to impress others, but to truly understand. "I can show you," he said softly. "But you must listen, really listen. Music is more than notes on a page. It's what you feel, not what you play." The student nodded eagerly, and from that evening on, small lessons began. It wasn't formal teaching. The cleaner didn't care about credentials or schedules. He simply shared what he knew, guiding the student to connect with music as he had once done himself. The academy slowly became a place of transformation, not because of competitions or awards, but because of quiet influence. Students who had once mocked began to understand patience, humility, and the value of hidden talent. They learned that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts were found in the most ordinary people. Through it all, the cleaner remained unchanged on the surface. He continued to sweep floors, empty bins, and polish benches as he had always done. Yet there was a quiet pride in his heart, a gentle satisfaction that life had given him another chance to connect even in small ways with people who had overlooked him. One night, after finishing his work, he sat at the piano alone, letting his fingers wander across the keys. The music was for him this time, unobserved, a reminder of who he had been and who he still was. He smiled softly, remembering the faces of the students who had begun to see him differently and felt a sense of peace. He knew that the world would not change overnight. Some people would continue to judge by appearances, and some would never notice the hidden beauty in others. But he also knew that a single moment, a single song, could change how someone thought and felt, and sometimes that was enough. The cleaner left the academy that night, the sound of his footsteps blending with the echo of faint piano notes. The city lights reflected softly on the wet pavement, and he walked home with a quiet sense of contentment. Music had returned to his life, not as a career or a stage, but as a connection, a bridge between hearts. And though the students still whispered about him in hallways, their words were no longer filled with mockery. They were filled with curiosity, respect, and sometimes awe. They had seen a glimpse of a life that carried depth, resilience, and beauty, something they had never expected to find in someone they had once dismissed as ordinary. The cleaner continued his work night after night, carrying music with him in his heart. And as he worked, he smiled, knowing that sometimes being unnoticed was the perfect way to prepare for a moment when the world could finally see who you really were. It was a quiet evening at the city's music academy. The hallways were empty except for the faint echo of piano notes drifting from the practice room. The students had gone home for the night, leaving behind a mess of scattered papers, coffee cups, and footprints across the shiny floor. As the sound of laughter faded down the corridor, a man wearing a faded uniform entered slowly, holding a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. He was the cleaner, someone most people hardly noticed. Every night he came after everyone had left, sweeping, mopping, and wiping down the chairs that others never thought twice about. His face carried years of quiet endurance. The deep lines near his eyes showed more than age. They carried the weight of time and stories untold. He didn't say much to anyone. When the day students crossed paths with him, some would nod politely, but most simply passed by, talking about their recitals, exams, and future dreams. To them, he was part of the background, like the walls or the piano benches, necessary but invisible. As he began sweeping near the grand piano, he paused for a moment. His eyes rested on the black and white keys. The reflection of the dim lights glimmered off the polished surface. He smiled faintly, a kind of smile that came from somewhere deep inside where old memories slept. He took a deep breath, then looked away and went back to mopping. Music had once meant everything to him. There was a time when he lived and breathed melodies, when the piano wasn't just an instrument, it was his voice. But that was long ago, before life took unexpected turns, before the responsibilities grew heavier than dreams. Now he worked nights, cleaning the very place where music lived loudly but never belonged to him anymore. Still, he never complained. He had learned to find peace in silence, to carry his memories quietly like a secret gift. One evening, as he finished cleaning the hallway, he heard a group of students talking loudly inside the main rehearsal room. They were practicing for an upcoming piano recital. He recognized the song. It was a classic, one he used to play with ease. The notes were beautiful, but something about them felt rushed, almost hollow. Still, he smiled to himself. At least they were trying. He pushed open the door gently and peeked inside. The students were gathered around the piano, arguing playfully over who played it better. They didn't notice him at first as he moved quietly to the corner to pick up some trash. "Come on, you missed that note again." One of them laughed. "Yeah, well, let's see you do it better," another replied, smirking. Their laughter filled the room. It was light, youthful, careless. The cleaner just kept working, minding his own business. But when one of the students noticed him, she nudged her friend and whispered something. The boy turned around, grinning. "Hey," he said loudly. "What do you think, old man? You think you could play it better?" The cleaner froze. He didn't answer, only smiled faintly as if he hadn't heard. He kept sweeping the corner quietly. But that only made them laugh more. "I'm serious," the boy said again, teasing. "Come on, show us your skills. You look like you've got some secret talent hiding in there." The others giggled, enjoying the moment. The cleaner looked up, meeting their eyes for the first time. There was no anger in his face, only calmness and a bit of sadness. He spoke softly. "I used to play a little, a long time ago." "A little?" one girl repeated mockingly. "All right then, show us. Play something." The cleaner looked at the piano again. His hands gripped the mop handle tightly. It had been years since he had touched a piano. His heart began to race. The idea of playing again made something stir inside him, excitement mixed with fear. He shook his head gently. No, it's okay. I'm just here to clean. But the students weren't done teasing. Come on, don't be shy, one said. It's not like anyone's watching. We just want to see if you can still hit the right notes. The cleaner smiled politely and went back to his work, but as he swept the floor, he couldn't help but glance at the piano again. His mind wandered back to another time years ago, when he sat at a similar piano under bright stage lights. He remembered the feeling of the keys beneath his fingers, the way the music had flowed out of him like it belonged to his soul. Those were the days when he believed music could change his life. But life didn't always go the way one planned. He had given up his music career to take care of his family after his father's passing. There were bills to pay, mouths to feed, and responsibilities that didn't leave room for dreams. Slowly, the piano became a memory instead of a daily companion. As he stood there, lost in thought, one of the students rolled his eyes and said loudly, "Guess he doesn't know how to play after all. Just a cleaner pretending." The group laughed again. The cleaner felt a small sting in his chest, but he said nothing. He finished wiping the piano bench and started packing up his things. But as he walked toward the door, his eyes caught sight of a small music sheet left on the stand. The title written on it was one of his old favorites, a song he had played hundreds of times. Without realizing it, he whispered a few notes softly under his breath. One of the students heard him. "Wait, what did you just hum?" He looked embarrassed. "Just an old piece I used to know." The student smirked. "Oh, really? Then prove it. Sit down and play." The others laughed again, some egging him on, others simply curious. The cleaner hesitated, glancing at the door. Every part of him wanted to walk away, but something stronger, a quiet longing, kept him there. He took a slow breath. "All right," he said quietly. "Just for a minute." The laughter stopped. The students didn't expect him to agree. They exchanged surprised looks as he put his mop aside and walked slowly toward the piano. He sat down carefully as if the seat might reject him after all these years. His hands hovered above the keys but didn't touch them yet. For a long moment he just stared, breathing deeply. The room grew quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed distant. His fingers trembled slightly as they finally touched the cool ivory keys. A small smile crossed his lips, but his eyes glistened with emotion. It felt strange, like reuniting with an old friend you never stopped missing. He pressed one key, then another, softly, gently, testing the sound. The first few notes came out uncertain, uneven. The students exchanged glances, holding back snickers. But then something changed. His hands began to move differently. His fingers found rhythm, confidence, and heart. The melody grew richer, flowing out of him like water that had been waiting behind a dam for years. The sound filled the room, smooth, emotional, alive. The laughter faded into silence. Every note carried something more than skill, it carried a story. The music spoke of lost time, of pain, of hope that refused to die. His body moved with the rhythm, completely lost in it as if the years melted away. The students stood still, their earlier smirks replaced by awe. None of them had expected this. The man they mocked only minutes ago was playing like someone who had lived through every note. When he finished, the last sound lingered in the air before fading into silence. No one said a word. The cleaner sat there quietly, his hand still resting on the keys. He didn't look up. He just smiled softly and whispered, "It's been a long time." The students didn't laugh this time. They didn't know what to say. One of them finally whispered, "That was beautiful." He stood up, nodded gently, and went back to his work. As he picked up his mop, he said quietly, "Everyone has something they hold inside. Sometimes you just need to listen." The students watched him leave, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall. For the first time, they saw him not as a cleaner, but as something else entirely. A man who had lived a story they couldn't yet understand. When the door closed behind him, the room stayed silent for a long time. One of the students finally sat down at the piano and tried to play the same melody, but it didn't sound the same. There was no emotion, no depth, just notes. They realized then that what they had heard was more than just music. It was life, experience, and quiet strength. That night, as the cleaner walked home under the streetlights, he felt lighter. For years, he had carried music silently inside him. Now, for the first time in a long while, he had let it speak again. And though no one knew his full story, in that brief moment he had reminded them and himself that real beauty often comes from the most unexpected places.